After weeks of observing Maya's behavior and growing increasingly concerned, Marcus knew he couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and it gnawed at him every time he saw her tear-streaked face or the way she clutched her backpack like it was a lifeline. He didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. Maya needed help, even if she wasn't ready to ask for it herself. One afternoon, after dropping off the last child at school, Marcus parked the bus in its usual spot behind the building. The engine rumbled to a stop and the quiet hum of the idling vehicle faded into silence. Normally, this was his chance to take a breather before heading out for the next round of pickups. But today, instead of relaxing, Marcus found himself walking toward the back of the bus with purpose. His eyes scanned the rows of seats until they landed on the one where Maya always sat. It wasn't unusual for kids to leave things behind. Forgotten jacket here, a stray pencil there, but something told Marcus that Maya's seat might hold more than just discarded items. As he reached it, he crouched down and gently lifted the cushion. What he found underneath made his stomach churn. Crumpled tissues were stuffed haphazardly beneath the seat, some damp and discolored from use. Among them were scraps of paper, folded and torn, as though someone had tried to hide them in a hurry. Marcus carefully unfolded one of the pieces and squinted at the messy handwriting scrawled across it. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Please don't hurt me." Another scrap read, "I can't tell anyone." His hands trembled as he sifted through the rest of the papers. Each note carried fragments of fear and desperation, written by a child who felt trapped and alone. It was as if Maya had been pouring her heart out onto these tiny scraps, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would find them and understand her pain. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't just sadness, this was terror. Someone was hurting Maya and she was too afraid to speak up. For a moment, Marcus stood frozen, clutching the crumpled papers in his hand. His mind raced with questions. Who was doing this to her? Was it someone at home? At school? How long had she been suffering in silence? And most importantly, how could he help without making things worse? The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. Marcus had always considered himself a good man, a dependable bus driver who cared about the kids he transported each day. But this was different. This wasn't just about offering a kind word or a granola bar. This was about protecting a child from harm, and the stakes couldn't be higher. If he acted too quickly or carelessly, he risked losing Maya's trust, or worse, putting her in greater danger. Determined to handle the situation thoughtfully, Marcus decided to start small. Over the next few days, he began looking for ways to build a connection with Maya. He knew she wasn't likely to open up right away, especially given how guarded she seemed, but he hoped that small gestures of kindness might eventually break through her defenses. On a chilly morning when frost still clung to the grass, Marcus brought a box of granola bars from home and stashed them behind his seat. When Maya climbed aboard the bus, shivering slightly in her thin jacket, he turned to her with a warm smile. "Hey, Maya," he said softly, holding out one of the snacks. "Looks like you could use a little fuel for the day." Maya hesitated, her wide eyes darting between the granola bar and Marcus's face. For a moment it seemed like she might refuse, but then she slowly extended her hand and took it. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the hum of the engine. She didn't meet his gaze, but the faintest hint of gratitude flickered in her expression. Marcus nodded, trying to mask his concern with a reassuring smile. "You're welcome. We've got to keep those brains of yours sharp, right?" Over. The following days, Marcus continued to look for opportunities to connect with Maya. Sometimes it was a kind comment about the weather, or a compliment on her neat handwriting, which he'd noticed during roll call. Other times it was simply a gentle nod or a wave as she boarded the bus. Slowly but surely, these small interactions began to chip away at the wall Maya had built around herself. One rainy afternoon, as the bus rattled along its route, Maya surprised Marcus by speaking up unexpectedly. "Why are you nice to me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Her question caught him off guard, and he glanced in the rearview mirror to meet her gaze. Marcus paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because everyone deserves kindness, he replied sincerely. Then after a beat he added, and because I care about you, Maya. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time, instead of turning away, she whispered, nobody cares about me. Not even my mom. The raw honesty in her voice broke Marcus's heart. He wanted to pull over, wrap her in a hug, and promise her that everything would be okay. But he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he gave her a soft, understanding smile. Well, I care about you, he said firmly, and so do lots of other people, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Maya didn't respond, but the slight nod of her head told Marcus that his words had reached her. It was a small victory, but it gave him hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to earn her trust. As the days went by, Marcus continued to observe Maya closely. He noticed subtle changes in her demeanor, tiny signs that suggested she was beginning to let her guard down. On occasion, she would glance up at him when he spoke, or she'd offer a hesitant smile when he handed her a snack. These moments were fleeting, but they meant the world to Marcus. They reminded him why he'd chosen this job in the first place, to make a difference, no matter how small. But despite these glimmers of progress, Marcus knew he couldn't solve Maya's problems alone. Whatever was happening to her required professional intervention, and he needed to tread carefully. He couldn't storm into her life demanding answers. That would only push her further away. Instead, he resolved to gather more information and seek guidance from someone who could help. That evening, after finishing his shift, Marcus sat down at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and stared at the crumpled notes he'd found under Maya's seat. Reading them again sent a fresh wave of anger and sadness coursing through him. This little girl was carrying a burden far too heavy for her young shoulders, and he was determined to lighten it, if only he could figure out how. With a deep breath, Marcus picked up his phone and dialed the number of Ms. Carter, a counselor, at the school. He trusted her judgment and knew she had experience dealing with sensitive situations involving students. After exchanging pleasantries, Marcus explained what he'd observed about Maya and shared the contents of the notes he'd discovered. Though he worried about overstepping boundaries, he also knew that staying silent wasn't an option. Ms. Carter listened intently, her tone shifting from concerned to alarmed as Marcus recounted the details. "This sounds serious," she said, gravely. "We need to approach this carefully, but we can't ignore it either. Let me see what I can find out." Hanging up the phone, Marcus felt a mix of relief and anxiety. He was glad to have shared the burden with someone else, but the uncertainty of what came next weighed heavily on him. Would Maya be safe? Could they truly help her? Or would their efforts only make things worse? There were no easy answers, but one thing was certain. Marcus wouldn't give up on her, not now, not ever. As he sipped his cooling coffee, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Helping Maya wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead promised to be long and difficult. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could be the person Maya needed, a steady presence in a world that had let her down. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into building a stronger connection with Maya. He knew that trust wasn't something that could be forced. It had to grow naturally, like a seed planted in fertile soil. Every morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon and the bus rolled up to apartment complex number 12, Marcus greeted Maya with a warm smile and a kind word. Sometimes it was as simple as saying, "Good morning, Maya. Ready for another day?" Other times he'd slip her a small snack or compliment her on how neatly she tied her shoelaces. It might have seemed trivial to an outsider, but to Marcus these gestures were crucial. They were his way of showing Maya that she mattered, that someone saw her and cared. At first, Maya remained reserved, responding with quiet nods or mumbled thanks, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, her guard began to lower. One chilly morning, when Marcus handed her a granola bar wrapped in colorful foil, she looked at him for just a second longer than usual before whispering, "Thank you." That tiny moment felt monumental to Marcus. It was proof that his efforts weren't in vain, that somewhere deep inside, Maya was beginning to believe she wasn't invisible. As their bond grew, Marcus continued to observe Maya more closely. He noticed patterns that others might have missed: the way she flinched whenever another child raised their voice, the faint bruises on her arms that appeared sporadically, and the hollow look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. These details painted a picture far darker than Marcus had initially imagined. Something, or someone, was causing Maya immense pain, and she was too scared to speak about it. Determined to uncover the truth, Marcus reached out again to Ms. Carter, the school counselor. Together, they decided to dig deeper into Maya's life without alarming her or drawing unnecessary attention. Ms. Carter began by speaking with Maya's teachers, asking subtle questions about her behavior in class. What she learned only deepened their concern. Maya often came to school hungry, sometimes skipping breakfast entirely. Her clothes were frequently mismatched or worn multiple days in a row, suggesting either neglect or financial hardship at home. Teachers also reported that Maya struggled to focus during lessons, her grades slipping steadily over the past few months. Most alarmingly, several staff members recalled seeing bruises on her arms and legs during gym class. When questioned, Maya always gave the same explanation: "I fell," or "I bumped into something." These accounts confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Maya wasn't just sad, she was suffering, and while the evidence pointed toward abuse, neither Marcus nor Ms. Carter could act rashly. They needed concrete proof before involving authorities, and they had to ensure Maya's safety above all else. In the meantime, Marcus doubled down on his efforts to support Maya emotionally. He started leaving encouraging notes tucked discreetly into her backpack, a smiley face drawn on a sticky note or a short message like, "You're stronger than you think." At first, Maya seemed unsure what to make of these surprises. She'd glance around the bus nervously as if worried someone might see them, but eventually, she began tucking the notes away carefully, almost protectively. To Marcus, this was a sign that she valued the kindness, even if she couldn't bring herself to acknowledge it openly. One afternoon, after dropping off the last child at school, Marcus decided to take a detour to Maya's neighborhood. He didn't plan to confront anyone or barge into her life uninvited. He simply wanted to understand where she came from. As the bus rumbled down Maple Street, he slowed to a crawl near apartment complex number 12. The building itself was run down, its paint peeling and windows cracked. Laundry hung limply from rusted balconies, and the parking lot was littered with trash. It wasn't the kind of place a child should call home, but Marcus reminded himself not to jump to conclusions based solely on appearances. What struck him most, however, was the absence of warmth. There were no kids playing outside, no laughter echoing through the halls. It was eerily quiet, as though the entire complex was holding its breath. Marcus parked the bus a block away and sat there for a moment staring at the building. His heart ached for Maya. How lonely must it feel to live in such a cold, unwelcoming environment? And how much courage did it take for her to board the bus, each morning carrying secrets too heavy for any child to bear? Back at school, Ms. Carter worked tirelessly behind the scenes to piece together more information. She reviewed Maya's attendance records and discovered frequent absences, particularly on Mondays. This pattern suggested that weekends were especially difficult for her, perhaps because she spent more time at home. Ms. Carter also spoke with the school nurse, who revealed that Maya had visited the clinic multiple times, complaining of stomach aches or headaches. Each time, the symptoms disappeared once she was allowed to rest in the nurse's office, a common coping mechanism for children enduring trauma. Armed with this growing body of evidence, Ms. Carter contacted Child Protective Services, CPS, to report her concerns. She emphasized the need for discretion, knowing that Maya's situation was delicate and required careful handling. CPS agreed to investigate, but cautioned that it would take time to gather enough information to act. Until then, Marcus and Ms. Carter resolved to keep Maya safe by maintaining a watchful eye and continuing to offer her support. Throughout this process, Marcus found himself reflecting on his own role in Maya's life. He wasn't her parent, teacher, or counselor. He was just a bus driver. Yet somehow fate had placed him in a position to make a difference. He thought about all the kids he'd transported over the years, many of whom he'd barely remembered after they graduated. But Maya was different. She had burrowed her way into his heart, not because of anything extraordinary she'd done, but because of the quiet resilience she showed despite her circumstances. Marcus knew he couldn't fix everything for Maya, not overnight anyway. Abuse cases were complicated, messy, and often heartbreaking. Even if CPS intervened, there was no guarantee Maya would end up in a better situation. Foster care could provide stability, but it came with its own challenges. Still, Marcus refused to dwell on the negatives. Instead, he focused on what he could do: show Maya kindness, listen when she needed to talk, and remind her that she wasn't alone. One rainy morning, as the bus splashed through puddles on its way to school, Maya surprised Marcus yet again. She leaned forward slightly in her seat and asked softly, "Why don't you give up on me?" Her question caught him off guard, and he turned to look at her in the rearview mirror. Her dark eyes searched his face, seeking reassurance. For a moment, Marcus didn't know how to respond. How could he explain that giving up wasn't an option? That seeing her cry every day broke his heart in ways he couldn't fully articulate? Finally, he settled on the simplest truth he could offer. "I don't give up on people I care about," he said gently. "And I care about you, Maya, more than you probably realize." Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time she didn't try to hide them. Instead, she nodded silently, clutching her backpack tighter against her chest. In that moment, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Maya wasn't ready to share her story, not yet, but she was beginning to trust him. That trust was fragile, like a thread stretched thin, but it was enough to keep him going. As the bus pulled into the school parking lot, Marcus glanced back at Maya one last time. "Remember," he said softly, "you're braver than you think, and I'm here if you ever need me." Maya didn't reply, but the faintest hint of a smile crossed her lips before she stepped off the bus and disappeared into the crowd of students. Watching her go, Marcus allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He still had no idea what the future held for Maya, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't stop fighting for her. Not now, not ever. Every morning the sun would rise over Maple Street, casting golden rays on the quiet neighborhood. The sound of birds chirping filled the air, and soon enough the familiar rumble of an old yellow school bus could be heard approaching. It was 7:05 a.m. sharp when Marcus Johnson pulled up in front of apartment complex number 12. For over 20 years, Marcus had driven this route, picking up children from their homes and taking them to school. He knew most of the kids by name, greeted them with a smile, and even remembered little details about their lives, like which kid loved basketball or who always forgot their lunchbox. But there was one student who stood out from the rest. Her name was Maya, and she was 12 years old. She wasn't loud like some of the other kids, nor did she laugh and chatter with her seatmates. Instead, Maya sat quietly near the back of the bus, clutching her oversized backpack tightly against her chest. What caught Marcus's attention more than anything else, though, were the tears. Almost every single day, as she stared out the window, silent streams of tears rolled down her cheeks. At first, Marcus thought it might just be normal preteen stuff. Maybe she was being teased at school or struggling with homework. Kids that age went through so many changes. It wasn't uncommon for them to feel overwhelmed sometimes. But as the weeks passed, the pattern didn't change. Day after day, Maya boarded the bus looking sad, withdrawn, and distant. And those tears? They never stopped coming. Marcus couldn't help but wonder what was going on with her. Why was she crying so often? Was someone hurting her feelings? Or was it something deeper? As a bus driver, he saw dozens of kids every day, but something about Maya tugged at his heartstrings. There was a heaviness in her eyes, a sadness that seemed far too big for someone so young. It made him uncomfortable, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. He wanted to do something, say something, but he didn't know where to start. One morning, unable to ignore it any longer, Marcus decided to try talking to her. When Maya climbed aboard the bus, he turned slightly in his seat and gave her a warm smile. "Good morning, Maya," he said softly. "How are you doing today?" Maya froze for a moment, clearly surprised that he'd addressed her directly. Most days, she kept to herself, blending into the background like a shadow. After a brief pause, she nodded quickly and mumbled, "I'm fine." Then, without another word, she hurried to her usual spot near the back of the bus and slumped into the seat, staring out the window. Marcus frowned. Something about her response, or lack thereof, bothered him. If she was truly fine, why did she seem so broken? Why did her shoulders sag under the weight of whatever burden she carried? And why wouldn't she look anyone in the eye? The more Marcus thought about it, the more convinced he became that there was more to Maya's story than met the eye. She wasn't just sad. She seemed scared. Scared of what, though? Scared of someone? The questions swirled in his mind, gnawing at him like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. Over time, Marcus started noticing other things about Maya that deepened his concern. For one, she rarely interacted with the other kids on the bus. While most of the children laughed, shared snacks, or played games during the ride, Maya stayed completely isolated. She never joined in conversations, never smiled, and never once offered a greeting to anyone else. Even when someone tried to talk to her, she either ignored them or gave a quick, dismissive reply before retreating further into her shell. Her appearance was another thing that stood out. Maya wore clothes that looked like they belonged to someone, much older, hand-me-downs maybe, or items purchased from a thrift store. They hung loosely on her small frame, making her seem even smaller than she already was. Her shoes were scuffed and worn, and her backpack, though large, looked practically empty except for a few notebooks and pencils. It was almost as if she didn't own much of anything, or worse, as if no one cared enough to ensure she had what she needed. What worried Marcus the most, however, was how protective Maya seemed of her belongings. Every time she got on the bus, she clutched her backpack like it contained something precious. At first, he assumed it was just a habit, but the way she held on to it so tightly suggested otherwise. It was as if she feared someone might take it away from her, or worse, discover what was inside. Despite all these observations, Marcus couldn't put his finger on exactly what was wrong. All he knew was that Maya wasn't okay. Whatever burden she carried, it was heavy, and it was slowly crushing her spirit. He wished he could reach out and help her, but he didn't know how. As much as he wanted to intervene, he also understood that he couldn't just barge into her life without understanding the full picture. So for now, he continued to watch, wait, and hope for an opportunity to make a difference. Little did he know that opportunity would come sooner than expected, and it would change both their lives forever. The day Maya moved to her foster home marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her but for Marcus as well. Though he knew she was in a safer place now, saying goodbye wasn't easy. The bond they'd formed over the past few months had become something neither of them could easily let go of. For Marcus, Maya wasn't just another student on his bus route. She was a reminder of why kindness mattered, of how one person's actions, no matter how small, could ripple outward and change lives. On the morning of her last ride, Maya climbed aboard the bus looking different somehow. There was still sadness in her eyes, but it wasn't the same overwhelming despair that had once shadowed her face. Instead, there was a flicker of hope, a quiet determination that told Marcus she was ready to take this next step even if it scared her. She carried her oversized backpack like always, though it seemed lighter somehow, as if shedding some of the burden she'd been carrying for so long. As the bus rolled along its familiar route, Marcus couldn't help but glance at Maya through the rearview mirror. She sat quietly near the back, staring out the window as usual, but today her gaze seemed softer, less guarded. When they reached the school, instead of rushing off like she normally did, Maya lingered by the front of the bus. Her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her backpack, and for a moment Marcus thought she might say something. But then, without a word, she handed him a folded piece of paper and stepped off the bus. Marcus watched her walk away, his heart heavy yet full. He waited until the bus pulled away from the curb before unfolding the note. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 words that brought tears to his eyes. "Thank you for saving me." Those simple words hit Marcus like a tidal wave. He hadn't thought of himself as a savior. He was just a bus driver doing what felt right. But in that moment, he realized the impact he'd had on Maya's life. It wasn't about grand gestures or heroic acts. It was about showing up, paying attention, and refusing to look away when someone needed help. As he read the note again and again, Marcus allowed himself to feel proud. Not just of Maya for finding the courage to trust him, but also of himself for not giving up. Maya's transition to her foster home wasn't seamless, but it was a world away from the life she'd left behind. Her new foster parents, Sarah and James, were warm and patient people who understood the importance of giving Maya time to adjust. They didn't push her to talk about her past or force her into activities she wasn't comfortable with. Instead, they focused on creating a safe and nurturing environment where she could begin to heal. At first, Maya struggled. Nights were hardest. She often woke up trembling from nightmares, clutching her blanket like a shield. During the day, she kept to herself, retreating into books or sketching pictures in a worn notebook she'd brought with her. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. One evening, while sitting at the kitchen table working on homework, Maya glanced up at Sarah and said softly, "Thank you for letting me stay here." Sarah smiled warmly, setting down her cup of tea. "You're welcome, sweetheart. This is your home now, for as long as you need it." It was a small moment, but it meant everything to Maya. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Like maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be loved. Back at school, Maya's teachers noticed changes too. She started participating more in class discussions, raising her hand tentatively at first but growing bolder with each passing week. Her grades improved, and she even joined an art club after Ms. Carter encouraged her to try it. Drawing had always been one of Maya's favorite ways to express herself, and being surrounded by other kids who shared her passion gave her a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. Ms. Carter kept in close contact with Sarah and James, updating them on Maya's progress and offering guidance whenever needed. Together, they worked to ensure Maya had access to therapy and counseling, knowing that healing from trauma took time and support. Though Maya rarely spoke about her past, her counselor noted that she was beginning to open up during sessions, sharing fragments of her story in her own time. One afternoon during a session, Maya drew a picture of a bus with a smiling driver waving from the front seat. When her counselor asked about it, Maya hesitated before explaining, "That's Marcus. He's the reason I'm here." Her words stayed with her counselor long after their session ended. They underscored the profound impact that compassion and attentiveness could have on a child's life. Marcus might not have realized it, but his actions had saved Maya, not just from her abusive home, but from losing faith in humanity altogether. For Marcus, life returned to its usual rhythm. The bus route remained the same. The kids continued to chatter and laugh, and the mornings were filled with the hum of the engine and the golden glow of sunrise. But something inside him had shifted. Helping Maya had reminded him of the power of connection, of how even the smallest acts of kindness could make a difference. He found himself paying closer attention to the other children on his bus, noticing details he might have overlooked before. The boy who always forgot his lunch, the girl who seemed unusually quiet, the twins who bickered constantly, but clearly adored each other. Word of Maya's situation spread quietly among the staff at the school, inspiring others to take a closer look at the students in their care. Teachers became more vigilant, counselors doubled down on their efforts to identify at-risk children, and administrators implemented new programs aimed at fostering a supportive community. Maya's story served as a wake-up call, a reminder that behind every child's smile or silence lay a world adults couldn't always see. Months later, Marcus received a letter in the mail. The envelope was plain, addressed in neat handwriting that he didn't recognize at first. Curious, he opened it and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It was from Maya. "Dear Mr. Marcus, I hope you are doing well. I wanted to tell you that I am happier now. My foster parents are really nice and I have a room all to myself. I still miss riding the bus with you sometimes, but I like my new school too. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. You showed me that good people exist. Love, Maya. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he read the letter. He traced the words with his fingertips, marveling at how far Maya had come. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. And though their paths might never cross again, he knew he'd carry her story with him forever. That night, as Marcus tucked the letter into a special drawer in his desk, he reflected on the journey they'd both taken. Maya had taught him that resilience wasn't about bouncing back untouched. It was about finding strength in the broken pieces and building something new. She had shown him that even in the darkest moments, there was always hope. And Marcus? He had shown Maya, and everyone else who heard her story, that one person truly could make a difference. All it took was a little kindness, a lot of patience, and the courage to care. The investigation into Maya's situation unfolded slowly, like a puzzle being pieced together one fragment at a time. Marcus and Ms. Carter worked quietly behind the scenes, sharing information and strategizing about how best to help Maya without alarming her or escalating the danger she might be in. It was a delicate balancing act. One wrong move could shatter the fragile trust they'd built with her. They knew that patience was key, but the weight of knowing Maya was suffering ate away at them both. Child Protective Services, CPS, began their inquiry shortly after Ms. Carter filed the report. The process was painstakingly thorough. Social workers reviewed Maya's school records, interviewed teachers and staff, and even conducted home visits under the guise of routine welfare checks. Meanwhile, Ms. Carter kept a close eye on Maya at school, documenting any changes in her behavior or physical condition. She noticed that Maya often appeared exhausted, as though she hadn't slept well, and there were days when she seemed unusually jumpy, flinching at loud noises or sudden movements. Marcus continued to play his part, maintaining his role as a steady presence in Maya's life. Each morning he greeted her with the same warmth and kindness, never letting on that anything unusual was happening. He didn't want to risk tipping off whoever might be hurting her, or worse, making her feel like she was being scrutinized. Instead, he focused on small gestures, slipping encouraging notes into her backpack, offering her snacks when she looked hungry, and simply listening whenever she chose to speak. One particularly cold morning, as frost clung stubbornly to the bus windows, Maya climbed aboard wrapped in an oversized sweater that looked 2 sizes too big for her. Her hair was damp from the rain and her cheeks were flushed red from the biting wind. Marcus handed her a granola bar and a folded piece of paper with a smiley face drawn on it. "You look like you could use some extra fuel today," he said, lightly, trying to keep the mood upbeat. Maya accepted the snack with a quiet thank you and tucked the note away without comment. But as the bus rattled along its route, she hesitated before leaning forward slightly in her seat. Do you think anyone can really change?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror, surprised by the question. Her tone wasn't accusatory or angry. It was tinged with sadness and maybe even a flicker of hope. "I think people can change," he replied carefully, choosing his words with precision. "But sometimes, we need help to make those changes happen." Maya nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the floor. Whether she fully understood what Marcus meant or not, he couldn't tell. Still, the fact that she'd asked such a profound question gave him hope. It suggested that somewhere deep inside Maya still believed in the possibility of a better future, even if she didn't know how to get there yet. As the weeks passed, CPS gathered more evidence pointing toward abuse in Maya's home. Social workers documented instances of neglect, including reports from neighbors who claimed they rarely saw Maya outside playing with other children. One neighbor mentioned hearing raised voices late at night coming from the apartment, followed by muffled sobs. Another recalled seeing Maya carrying grocery bags far too heavy for someone her size, suggesting she was shouldering responsibilities beyond her years. The most damning evidence came during a surprise visit to Maya's home. A CPS worker noted signs of disarray, dirty dishes piled high in the sink, clothes scattered across the living room floor, and a distinct lack of basic necessities like food or clean bedding. When questioned, Maya's mother admitted to struggling financially but insisted everything was fine. However, the worker also observed bruises on Maya's arms and legs, which matched the descriptions provided by teachers and the school nurse. Despite these findings, Maya remained silent. Whenever CPS workers spoke to her directly, she either denied anything was wrong or claimed she had fallen or bumped into things. Her stepfather, meanwhile, hovered nearby during interviews, glaring at her whenever she hesitated. The intimidation was subtle but unmistakable, and it reinforced the belief that Maya was too frightened to speak the truth. Back at school, Ms. Carter and Marcus discussed the progress of the investigation. While they were relieved that action was finally being taken, they worried about what would happen next. Removing Maya from her home could provide immediate safety, but it wouldn't erase the trauma she'd endured. Foster care was a gamble. It offered stability, but it also came with its own challenges. Transitioning to a new family and environment could be overwhelming for any child, let alone one as guarded and vulnerable as Maya. In the meantime, Marcus did everything he could to reassure Maya that she wasn't alone. On days when she seemed especially withdrawn, he made a point of sitting with her briefly after the other kids had disembarked from the bus. "Hey, Maya," he'd say gently. "Just wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" At first, Maya would shrug or mutter a vague response, but over time she began opening up, at least a little. Once she confided in him about how hard it was to focus in class because her mind kept wandering to thoughts of home. Another time, she admitted feeling guilty for causing trouble, even though Marcus knew she hadn't done anything wrong. These moments of vulnerability were rare, but they meant the world to Marcus. They showed that Maya trusted him enough to share pieces of her pain, no matter how fragmented. One afternoon, after dropping off the last child at school, Marcus decided to take a detour to the park near his house. It was a place he often visited when he needed to clear his head, and today he found himself thinking about Maya more than ever. As he walked along the winding path, surrounded by tall trees and chirping birds, he reflected on the resilience she'd shown despite everything she'd been through. Most adults would crumble under the weight of such adversity, yet Maya continued to show up every day, putting one foot in front of the other. It dawned on Marcus that Maya's strength wasn't just inspiring, it was extraordinary. She carried burdens no child should have to bear, yet she still managed to find moments of joy, however fleeting. Whether it was the way her eyes lit up when he handed her a snack or the faint smile she gave him after reading one of his encouraging notes, Maya reminded him of the power of hope. Even in the darkest times, a single ray of light could make all the difference. When the CPS investigation concluded, the results confirmed everyone's worst fears. Maya's stepfather had been physically abusing her for months, using threats and intimidation to silence her. Her mother, overwhelmed and financially dependent on her partner, had turned a blind eye to protect herself and Maya's younger siblings. The decision was made to remove Maya from the home immediately and place her in foster care with a loving family eager to provide her with stability and safety. On the morning of her last ride on Marcus's bus, Maya boarded looking different, somehow. Her shoulders weren't hunched quite so low, and while sadness lingered in her eyes, there was also a glimmer of relief. As the bus pulled away from the curb, she handed Marcus a folded piece of paper before stepping off. Inside was a simple message written in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for saving me." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he read the note. He didn't see himself as a hero, just a man doing what anyone should do when they see a child in need. But in that moment, he allowed himself to feel proud. Proud of Maya for surviving. Proud of himself for not giving up. And proud of the community that had come together to ensure Maya got the help she deserved. Though the road ahead wouldn't be easy for Maya, Marcus knew she now had a chance to heal, to laugh, dream, and live the life she deserved. And as the bus rumbled down Maple Street, leaving Maya behind for the last time, Marcus whispered a silent prayer. "Be brave, Maya. You've got this."